All right then. So thank you again for joining us. This morning I want to share some ideas with you from one of my favorite books. I'm holding it up for the folks on YouTube. This is just one copy, and you may find other covers. The title of the book is In Tune with the Infinite, and it's written by Ralph Waldo Trine, and it was first published in 1897. His first book was published in 1896, and I believe the title was What the Whole World's A-Waitin' For. And the good thing about books of this age is that the first printings are largely in the public domain. The copyrights have expired. And you can go on the internet and you can find that copy of that book that I talked about in PDF format. And there's even an audiobook format somebody posted up on YouTube where if you'd rather listen to it than to read it, somebody read the entire book. Sounds like a mechanical voice or a professional voice, but seems pretty well done. But it's up there. And it's okay that the book is over 100 years old, because the ideas that we are talking about are really timeless. The ideas that we are talking about are ideas that go back to the beginning of the unfoldment of human consciousness. You will find the kind of things that we were talking about in the major philosophies and the major religions of the world, as ancient as they come. In the Old Testament and Judaism, it says, as you think and believe in your heart, so are you. In Buddhism, we are told that everything that you experience is a result of what you have thought. In Christianity, it says, pray believing in your heart that it is done, and it shall be done. Not may or could be or perhaps, shall, like a command. You shall do this, you shall do that. If you went to parochial school, you know what I'm talking about. You shall obey. So the ideas are timeless, and it's amazing to me that we can pick up a book that's 100 years old, more than 100 years old, and it can speak to us in terms today, exactly as if Ralph Waldo Trine had written it yesterday. You know, it's just that kind of a book. He's that kind of a writer. A little bit of history about him. I want to read some passages from the book, and then we want to talk about what it means. This book, In Tune with the Infinite, became very, very popular. He sold over 2 million copies of the book, which I guess was quite a bit in those days. Remember, this was before the internet. And Henry Ford has said, liked the book so much that he bought it by the case. Now, I don't know how many were in a case, but he bought it by the case, and he would give copies of Trine's book to his business associates and tell them, you know, here's something. Understood that there was a power in the universe that responded to him when he made up his mind. You know, the famous story of the V8 engine is that he told his engineers that he wanted one, and they told him that it couldn't be done. And he came back 6 months later and said, how are you doing? And they said, it can't be done. And he came back another 6 months later and said, how you doing? And they said, it still can't be done. He says, well, then I guess I don't need you. I'll just go hire a bunch of people who can do it. And they asked for an opportunity to go back to work. And of course, they found a way to cast 8 cylinders in a single block, and that's how the V8 was born. Queen Victoria of England is also said to be someone who read this book. And this morning, as I was doing some research on the internet, Gandhi is alleged to be someone who has been exposed to the ideas of Ralph Waldo Trine. This book was translated into over 20 different languages, and it spread across Europe. Remember, this was the beginning of the 20th century. These ideas were being shared. And I often wonder personally, you know, when we look at the origins of new thought in this country, Thomas Troward, a British judge who studied in India, or who worked in India for many years, was very influential, and his ideas came to the United States through himself and through his protege Emmett Fox. Now, when Thomas Troward came back to England from India, he started to write down his observations, this philosophy that he was developing. And a person noticed his notes. He was sitting at a tea house in England, and in those days you shared tables. You would go in and they would sit you down at a table. There was a seat, even if there was somebody already there. And this person said they couldn't help but reading over his shoulder, and they realized that he was a student of higher thought. And Troward said he didn't know what that meant. But the point is, there were people in England who were already studying the philosophy that would go on to become known as New Thought. Troward thought he had discovered it independently, and he kind of worked with these folks and got his ideas kind of worked through and worked out, and then he went on to give the famous Edinburgh lectures and Doré lectures of what he called mental science in those days. And I often wonder how much of these ideas of quote higher thought unquote that the people talked to Troward about and then came back to us through Troward's teachings and through Emmett Fox's teachings, how much of that is Ralph Waldo Trine that went over to Europe, was translated, was read, and then came back to us kind of in a surreptitious manner. So Trine was very influential. He's a very influential writer then, and he continued to be very influential for a great number of years. As I say, his reading is very light. It's very easy. It's very touching. He has a way of just of observing something and stating it very simply. He lived until 1958. He died at the age of 91. I think he continued preaching up until just several years before his death, like 3 years before his death. So he was still active in the ministry until the mid 1950s. And mind you, this book was written in 1897. So I want to read to you his introduction or his preface to the first edition. And keep in mind when I'm reading this that he wrote this in 1896 or 1897, certainly before 1897. There is a golden thread that runs through every religion in the world. There is a golden thread that lives through the lives and the teachings of all the prophets, seers, sages, and saviors in the world's history, through all the lives of all the men of truly great and lasting power. All that they have ever done or attained to has been done in full accordance with law. What one has done, all may do. The same golden thread must enter into the lives of all who today, in this busy work-a-day world of ours, remember that was 1897, would exchange impotence for power, weakness for suffering, for abounding health and strength, pain, and unrest for perfect peace, poverty of whatever nature for fullness and plenty. Each is building their own world. We both build from within and we attract from without. Thought is the force with which we build, for thoughts are forces. Like builds like and like attracts like. In a degree that thought is spiritualized does it become more subtle and more powerful in its workings. This spiritualizing is in accordance with law, and it is within the power of all. Everything is first worked out in the unseen before it is manifested in the seen, in the ideal before it is realized in the real, in the spiritual before it shows forth in the material. The realm of the unseen is the realm of cause. The realm of the seen is the realm of effect. The nature of effect is always determined and conditioned by the nature of its cause. To point out the great facts in connection with and the great laws underlying the workings of the interior, spiritual, thought forces, to point them out so simply and so clearly that even a child can understand, is the author's aim. To point them out so simply and so clearly that all can grasp them, that all can take them and infuse them into everyday life, so as to mold it in all its details in accordance with what they would have it, is his purpose. That life can thus be molded by them is not a matter of mere speculation or theory with him, but a matter of positive knowledge. There is a divine sequence running through the universe. Within and above and below, the human will incessantly works the divine will, to come into harmony with it, and thereby with all the higher laws and forces, to come then into league and to work in conjunction with them, in order that they can work in league and in conjunction with us, is to come into the chain of this wonderful sequence. This is the secret of all success. This is to come into the possession of unknown riches, into the realization of undreamed of powers. And then it finishes off with a quote, It says, within yourself lies the cause of whatever enters into your life. To come into the full realization of your own awakened inner powers is to be able to condition your life in exact accord with what you would have it. So that was written, I say, over 100 years ago, but it speaks to us again today. It's very simple. No superstition in there, and not a lot of dogma and creed. He just says there's a way that the universe works, and if we will attune ourselves to the way that the universe works, then we can experience the harmony and the power and the peace that are the very nature of it, of God, of peace, of love, of whatever we choose to call this divine force. Now he goes on to tell us in the very beginning of the book, I just want to mention briefly, the very first sentence of the book starts off and it says, the optimist is right and the pessimist is right, if you look at it each from their own point of view. I believe you saw that emerge in Henry Ford's famous quotation of, if you believe you're right or you believe you're wrong, you're right. So, so you can kind of see the influence that he had there. But to kind of give you an example of what a teacher he was and how he could make things so tangible, so easy to grasp. He could paint the picture with words that stays with you for a long time. As he goes into the book, he starts to talk about, he had a friend, and the friend had a small estate that the friend called a farm. And on this estate was a beautiful lily pond. And it was a pond, and the water was clear, and the water was flowing through it, and the pond was surrounded by all kinds of marshes and beautiful flowers, and it had fish in it, and the birds would come, and the butterflies would land in the bushes. And he was a spiritualized man, according to Trine. Remember, Trine is a preacher. Trine is putting forward a story for some benefit, something for us to take away from it. So he says he was a spiritualized man, a man who was connected and felt this connection to the divine. And he didn't have a no trespassing sign or a private property sign or a keep off sign or things like that. Instead, he had a little sign where the lane turned off the main road and the lane went up to the pond, and he said, all are welcome at this pond. So on the weekends, families would come out and they would spread their lawn blankets out and their picnic baskets, and the children would be playing and running about, and the parents would be sitting on the blankets enjoying the beautiful day. And the stream that fed the pond spilled out of the pond and kind of meandered through the pasture, and the grass was lush and green, and the animals would come and drink, and the cattle would come and drink, and there was so much of it that it would even spill off of his own property and go down through the gully, and it would provide water to the animals on the other side of the fence on a neighbor's property. And what was feeding all of this was an aqueduct up at the top of the ridge. Now, if some of us have lived in California, and you're familiar with the aqueducts that run on the top of the ridges that bring the water to the farmlands. And on each property, there's a little floodgate. There's a little tiny door that goes up and down on the side of the aqueduct over a hole on the side of the aqueduct. And there's a little handle that you turn around, handle on the top, and you can turn that, and depending upon how much you turn the handle, that's how high the door goes up or down. That's how much water comes through. And of course, you have to pay for that. You have to pay some kind of a fee to the government to get that water. And this man had gone up to the top of the hill, and he had opened up that floodgate. He had opened up the doorway on the aqueduct. And the cool water was coming down from the mountains, and it was spilling out through the valve that he had opened. And it was this influx, this inflow of cool, clear water that was coming, pure water that was coming down the mountain, that was meandering down the creek and going into the pond, and it was sustaining all of the life and all of the joy that he described, and it was going down, and it was nurturing the grasses and the animals even downstream. And his friend had to go to Europe for a year, so he leased the property to another man. And this man was not so much a spiritualized man as he was a practical man, a businessman we would call him today, you know. And the first thing a businessman is going to do is say, well, you know, what am I getting out of this? Why am I paying for this water when I'm not getting anything out of it? What do I need this water for? What do I need the pond for? What do I need all these people coming up on the property on the weekend for? So that man went up the top of the hill and he closed the valve. And when that influx of cool, clear, fresh water stopped coming into the pond, the lilies began to die, the marsh around began to die, the fish began to die, the whole thing started to stink as everything was rotting and it was stagnating. The fresh water that was flowing down the hill and it was feeding the grasses and going off to the neighbor's property and feeding the cattle, that dried up as well, and everything started to brown off. And the point of Ralph Waldo Trine's story is that it was the connection to the source. It was the connection to that flow. It was that being open. It was opening the valve that allowed all of this abundance to be demonstrated, all of this joy to be demonstrated, all of this connection with life and the beauty and the harmony that was already there. It was just waiting to come out. It was just waiting to display itself. But somebody had to open that valve. And it took a spiritualized man, a spiritual-minded person to do that. And the material-minded person couldn't see it, so they closed off the valve. You know, and I can't help but think, if you look at what's going on in our society today, if you look at how the arts and literature and programs like that are being taken out of our schools because the people in charge don't see value to it. They don't see how that leads to a paying job. I hear the debates on the radio, you know. If it doesn't lead to a paying job, we don't need to be subsidizing it and paying for it in public schools. We need to take it out of there. And to me, that's kind of like turning off the valve. It's not seeing the value in the connection, not seeing how things interact and interface. And it is turning off that valve because we're practical minded. And that in turn causes this stagnation. So what Trine goes on to tell us, I want you to keep that picture with you, and if you get a chance this afternoon to go someplace beautiful, particularly where there's flowing water, but go someplace in nature and close your eyes and get that image of the stream, get that image of the pond, get that image of the children playing, and recognize that all of that beauty was already there, waiting to be demonstrated once someone opened that valve. So what Trine goes on to tell us is that if we look at the universe, and if we look at this golden thread, if we look at the religions, the philosophies of mankind, that pretty much you would get people to agree that God, whatever their definition of God is, but God is the substance behind it all. That God is the life force, God is the intelligence, right? We would say omnipotence and omniscience. God is the very substance of it all. Now, substance means to stand under. God is that which stands under it all. We deal in the world of effect, and we look at the planet Earth, and we look at the plants and the trees and the dirt, and we see it. But if we stop and think about where it came from, ultimately it came from energy. Somehow, somewhere, a long, long time ago, the energy of the universe took form, became matter, and that matter took the form of the earth. But nevertheless, whether we think that was done 4,000 years ago by a direct command from God saying let it be, whether we believe it was millions of years ago by a movement of thought of the divine saying let it be, and the rest unfolded. If we go into the Aboriginal cultures and look at the creation myths, you know, creation was a deliberate act. Creation was something that was done by a decision, by a thought, by a mental action within the divine mind. And that's where the cause is. And everything else that we see is the effect. So what Trine is telling us is that the ultimate fact of the universe, if we can get our minds away from the effects, if we can step back away from being so caught up with the trees that we can't see the forest, but get ourselves back far enough, we can literally see the unfoldment of divine action in the universe. I love looking at the pictures from Hubble. I just absolutely love it. I guess it was because when I was a kid, I remember when Sputnik was launched and running outside the house as a little kid and trying to look up in the night sky and say, where is it? Where is it? You know, we could hear it on the radio, but where was it? We wanted to go out and see it. And then the space program came into being during my youth. You know, I remember as a kid walking to grade school when I was a little kid. There was a policeman who would come and get us across. We had to get across like a 4 or 5 lane road at one crossing, and he was there to help us get across. And that was, I guess, when Alan Shepard had first done the suborbital flight. And he was holding up traffic with one hand and waving us across the street with the other, and he was telling us A-OK, A-OK. That was the buzzword of the day, A-OK. We were in space. But there was a picture on the internet this week. It said that Hubble has found a galaxy far, far away. I guess it's where Star Wars was filmed. And they found 4 quasars in this galaxy, and they said that's extremely unusual because they're so close together. Now, mind you, they're only 700,000 light years apart instead of hundreds of millions of light years apart, and it just boggles the mind. If you think in terms of the human lifespan, we'll make it 100 years to make the math easier. There's 10 lifetimes in 1,000 years, and there's 700,000 light years apart. These quasars are supposed to be, which is like 7 million lifetimes. You know, when you start to look at the numbers, it just boggles the mind at how big the universe is, how grand God's creation is. But in this picture that they had, and it may have been an artist's conception, I don't know, but it had all of this matter that was going into the black hole. You know, the energy, the matter goes back into the black hole, and it shoots back out as energy, and it just had this big cloud, of gas and energy that was spewing out of these quasars, out of these black holes. And of course, they in themselves were extended across regions of space that were, you know, I don't know how big, but big, but huge. So if we think about all of that is the activity. All of that is working perfectly. All of the physics are working perfectly, even though the human mind doesn't quite understand it and perhaps never will understand it. It's all working perfectly. There is an intelligence. Excuse me. Get a drink of water. There's an intelligence there that knows what to do. There's a power there that is powerful enough to do it. The omniscience is there, and it's everywhere. It is omnipresence. So Trine tells us that whoever we're talking to, whatever religion we're studying, pretty much we will find a golden thread where people will agree. They will agree that which they call God is the very substance, the very life, the very intelligence that runs the entire universe. And then Trine goes on to say, then we have to look at what is the supreme fact of human life, what is the supreme fact of our life. And he says, if we think about it, we have to recognize that which we call our life was created by this divine intelligence. That which we call our life is in fact that divine intelligence acting through its creation as us. But we can do something. We can decide whether or not we want to turn the valve on or off that connects us to our spiritualized nature, the divine nature that stands underneath all creation and behind it, and live our lives completely in the human realm, according to the human laws, according to the way things work in the world of appearances. And he says most of us do that based out of sheer ignorance. Just based out of sheer ignorance. But even when we start to awaken to the fact that there is a spiritual nature of the universe, there is this divine, there is this thing called God, there is this power, there is this love. And even when the intellect tells us that we must be some part of it because we did not create ourselves, where did we come from? If the creative impulse of the divine had the energy of the universe become the matter of this galaxy, and part of it become this planet, and our very bodies are the stuff of the planet, taking the form of the body, the dust of the earth in biblical terms. The food that we eat comes out of the earth and it goes in the body. And when we die, the body goes back into the earth, right? Dust thou art, dust returneth, that kind of thing. Even when our intellect starts to awaken to this idea, we still must choose to turn the valve. We still must choose to make our connection to the divine. It's not like the divine is going to withhold itself from us, but it must wait until we invite it into our experience. It must wait until we have, through our free will, arrived at that place where we say, yes, yes, I want a deeper relationship with God. Yes, I want a deeper relationship with God's love. I want to stop living my life as merely a human being, and I want to start living my life as that spiritualized man that he told us about, the one who has opened the valve, the one who has made the connection to the divine that was always there, waiting to be connected. Always there. Waiting in quiet repose, as the poet would put us. Waiting in quiet repose for us to discover it. And at some point, we awaken to the possibility. Now, Trine tells us that if you stop and think about all of the problems that we face on this planet, and I remember he was talking over 100 years ago. you wonder if he's looking at us now, if he's just shaking his head. But he's talking about all the problems on the earth, if we think about them, are caused by selfishness. Selfishness. Think about that. You know, our press is full of stories about the top 1% and the top 1/10 of 1%. They're hoarding all the wealth and they're causing all these problems and all these things. And if we want to accept that that's going to impact us, then that's our belief, and it will. But you know what? I live in an unlimited universe. There's more than enough stuff. There's more than enough energy to become stuff. And the flow of stuff in and out of my life does not depend on somebody else's generosity or somebody else's greed. It depends upon my connection to the divine, my connection to the flow of all of life. So I can look at what we see in the world. We can see people killing each other. We can see people stealing from each other. We can see people doing all kinds of things to each other as they are in this process of awakening to their spiritual nature. But if we look at all of the problems of the world, can we say that they are caused by selfishness? And can we then say that the cause of selfishness is ignorance? Is ignorance. For who, if they truly understood their connection to that which is all that there is, who would bother to work in the world of effects? Who would bother to work in the world of greed and willpower and control and all of the things that we see going on in the world? So what we want to remember is the world is in the process of awakening. What we see going on is just simply a result of what I call the level of maturity of human consciousness. It has to experience the consequences of its thinking before it'll challenge its thinking. Right? The trigger event, You know, most people never stop and think until they get the whack on the side of the head and they say, what was that all about? What was that all about? Why did this happen to me? And then they start to explore alternatives. Excuse me. So we can understand that the world is in the process of awakening. And then we can understand that the greatest gift that any of us could possibly give to the world is to open the R valve, is to make our connection, is to allow that love and that kindness and that joy to flow through us like that clear water flowed through that lily pond, but then went on. So you then went on past the boundaries of the pond, went downstream and blessed, if you want to think of it in those terms, blessed the grass and the animals and the neighbors and everybody else. So we hopefully come to a decision at some point in our life. Yes, I want to turn the valve. I want to go and open that valve. I want to do that. I understand that as I do that, then all of the vigor of life, the energy of life, the strength of life, the health of life, everything that life is about energizes me. You know, if you go back and look at the ways of the world, how much of what people do in the world is simply to feel alive, simply to feel alive. It's just what they want. Just want to be alive. Just want to feel alive. The thrill seeking and the things that we do to get our adrenaline flowing, and the movies that we go to that shock us and scare us, and all the kinds of things that we do, race cars and skydiving and rock climbing and all of these different things, they just let us feel alive. We just want to be in that moment, and we want to be alive. You know. There was a movie about the Second World War. Peter Falk and Robert Mitchum were in it, and one of them was a journalist, and the other was a hard-boiled combat veteran. And the journalist went along and was trying to understand what it was like for human beings to be in combat. And as the screenwriter had the story set up, then they came under attack, and all of the soldiers were killed, and the only one left was the journalist. And the journalist had to pick up some of the weapons and defend himself. And when the journalist came back from the field, he said that he had never felt so alive in his entire life. And he understood now what the effect of combat was it was having on the men, why they kept going back to it over and over and over again. There's something about that exhilaration of just being alive. And I think that is, it's driving through everybody. We just want to be alive. And we have to understand that when we turn the valve, when we get connected to the source of all life, that the thrill of life flows through us to a greater degree. We don't need any outside stimulus. The thrill of life, of just being alive, of just being part of this magnificent universe, just flows through us. All of the power there is, all of the wisdom there is, the omniscience is available to us through a learning that defies process, through our intuition. You know, you've heard me say it before, the intellect can only take us so far, but there's something that existed before the intellect that we can access through our intuition. So that which we need to know is available to us. That which we need to do is available to us. The energy to do it is available to us. The motivation to do it is available to us. And we want to make ourselves a part of that flow. And it's not only blessing our lives, but it is blessing the lives of all whom we come in contact with. So Trine goes on to tell us, he says, it's very simple. We human beings make things so hard. We take the simplest thing and we make it hard. And this idea about then, well, how do I make my contact? How am I going to do this? Where am I going to go to do this? What is the right procedure? And all of these kinds of questions start to come up in the human consciousness. And he tells us we have to relax. You have to consider, where is the only place that you're going to do this? Where's the only place that you're going to make that contact? It's not out there somewhere. It's not in a temple or a church out there somewhere. You don't have to get on a plane or a train and make a pilgrimage anywhere. Because the only place that you can know and the only place that you can make your contact is within. Within. It's not an outside job. You can't go anywhere and have somebody sprinkle something on you and give it to you. It is within. So if we wish to make that contact, there's a couple things that we have to have. First, we have to have the desire. Do you really wish to have the experience of God? Do you really wish to experience the unity of all life? Do you really wish to come into that ineffable experience of the love and the presence of God that the mystics talk about? And they talk about it in words that fail them, words that they can't possibly describe the experience. So they speak in poetry, they speak in visions, they speak in circles sometimes. So we have to have the desire, but it's not just a casual desire. You know, it's not like, well, gee, I think I'd like to have Chinese food this week or Italian food this week, but maybe I won't. Maybe I'll have something else. No, it's a burning desire. It is an all-consuming desire. It is the bush that burns but doesn't consume. It is that which we want as much as we would want the pond if our hair was on fire. That is the level of desire that we are talking about. And some teachings tell us if you haven't that level of desire, then don't bother. Don't even bother trying. Don't even bother getting started. You're only going to make things difficult for yourself. Desire is the starting point of all achievement, is what Napoleon Hill tells us in Think and Grow Rich. Do you desire oneness with God as much as you would desire a pond if your hair were on fire? And if not, then the first step is to awaken that desire. But once we have the desire, once we know that that is what we shall have, and we will not stop until we have it. The next thing is attention. What is it that you're giving your attention to? Are you giving your attention to the presence and the activity of God in your life all about you, everywhere present, or are you giving attention to 88 million other things? I don't know if you saw the article on the news this week, but it said, I think it was Microsoft they credited with the study, but they said that the people who use smartphones now have an attention span shorter than a goldfish. I guess that would mean that even goldfish are smarter than we are. Of course, if we could live in a bowl and just have people bring us everything we needed, we'd probably do it as well. But there's so much coming at us, so many diversions, so many distractions, so much information, you know. Excuse me, every web page we go to has things that flicker and flash and move and zip, and all of these things to distract us. What are you giving your attention to? Are you giving your attention to the love and to the presence of God in, as, around, and through you? And are you paying attention to what you're paying attention to? In other words, are we getting up in the morning and doing our spiritual practice for 20 minutes and doing our spiritual practice for 20 minutes before we go to bed at night, but during the day we're thinking about everything else? Or during the day, are we constantly reminding ourselves, constantly bringing ourselves back, constantly asking ourselves, what am I thinking about? What am I paying attention to? So Trine tells us that we have to start with being still, right? Be still and know. It's been there all along. We have to take time to be still. To be still and do nothing else but to invite that contact, to invite that valve to be turned, to allow that presence and that love that is already here to reveal itself to us more fully. When I was a kid, we learned a prayer, and it went something like, "Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle within them the fire of your love." Very brief, very simple meditation. Can we sit and be still for no other purpose than to experience the presence of God? Not to ask for anything, not to tell God what we need, but simply to be in the love and the presence of God. Because when we do that, what we need to know is known. What we need to do, we do. Our purpose, our tasks are revealed to us. The resources to accomplish what needs to be accomplished are provided. But it starts with turning that valve, turning that valve. Through a deliberate act, a decisive act, an attentive act. And then during the day, we want to take, Joel Goldsmith calls them little God breaks. We want to take little God breaks during the day. Maybe you can only do it for 30 seconds, you know. I worked in a call center for a while, and sometimes we only had a few seconds in between calls, but in those few seconds, and we stop to experience the presence of the divine. If we get a 15-minute break, can we stop to experience the presence of the divine? Instead of getting caught up with whatever's on the TV in the break room, usually sports or CNN or something like that. Can we turn our attention away from the world of effect and turn our attention to the world of cause, which we find only within, and allow that love to awaken to our heart? And then the third thing to consider is your expectation. What are you expecting? You know, we say, I am a spiritual being. I live in a spiritual universe. The love of God is all around me. The peace of God is all around me. I bring my attention to that as often as I can during the day. But what are you expecting? Look at what you're expecting. It's a great way to figure out what you're thinking below your level of consciousness. If somebody tells you something's going on, are you expecting the best or are you expecting the worst? If somebody tells you another person made a mistake, you can say, well, I figured that was coming. You know. We must always act as if. We must always expect the best. We must always expect that the love and the presence of God is everywhere present. We must bless even those who would do us harm. We must see the presence of God within them. And we must always expect, as Rumi said, we must always expect that the universe is rigged on our side. We must always expect that the love and the presence and the power and the wisdom of the divine, which is everywhere present, is right here where I am and right where all the people I need to work with today are. And I've turned the valve. I've turned the valve. I've set my intention. I've declared my desire that this day, this very day, I come to know God more fully, more freely, more completely than ever before. That I see the love and the presence of God in each and every person whom I meet today. And I see the activity of God in everything that I do today. And today I am aware of what I give my attention to and what my expectations are revealing back to me about what I truly believe. And if we find that our attention wanders or our expectations are still functioning on the human power side instead of the spiritual power side, all we have to do is gently bring it back. Right? That's why we learn how to meditate. When your mind wanders, gently bring it back. That's all. Just gently bring it back. The thing we don't want to do is what Osho talks about, which is letting our mind wander like a stray dog, and then we follow it. We follow it wherever it goes this day. What is your intention? Where is your attention? And what are your expectations? So Trine invites us then to just try something very simple. Take time to be alone with the presence of God. Take time to notice the presence and the activity of God in everything about you, in everyone about you, in everything that goes on in your life, with every bite of food that you take, with a beautiful act of digestion by which the intelligence that runs the universe functioning at the location of our body takes that food and turns it into energy and turns it into muscle and turns it into fat and turns it into bones and turns some of it into eyes. How does it know what to do? Because it is connected to the omniscience of the universe. We want to live every day, as much as we can, we want to live every day observing the miracle about us, catching God being God in everyone and everything around us, especially in ourselves. We want to catch ourselves if we fall back into the mode of thinking from the human power, from the willpower, to let go of those ideas and to recognize that there's no power in the universe, no power other than God. And we have opened the valve. It's the 23rd Psalm. Thou hast set a table for me in the presence of mine enemies. It doesn't matter what's going on out there. The Lord shepherds me. I lack nothing. So Trine kind of covers a lot of ground in the book, and the last point I want to briefly mention here is he asks us to consider this. If you truly believe that God is the power and the wisdom that stands under the universe, and you truly believe that there's a way to connect with that power by going within, by opening that valve that connects us, which is our thoughts, our mental activity, by setting our desire on God, by setting our attention on the activity of God, by monitoring our expectations and only expecting the activity and the presence of God to show up in our lives. If we truly believe that, then why would we waste time on anything else? Why would we waste time on anything else? We don't need another seminar. We don't need to go anywhere. We don't need any special equipment. Don't need a yoga mat. Don't need incense. All those things are good, but we don't need them. What we need is desire, attention, and expectation. So I invite you then this week to stop and ask yourself those fundamental questions. Do I truly believe that God is all there is? God is the power of the universe, the intelligence of the universe, the energy of the universe, the energy that becomes the stuff and substance and matter of the universe? Do I understand that the way that the universe works is that the spiritual side, the mental side, right? Remember he talked about spiritualized thought. Can you see your life as a spiritualized thought that God is having? That your thought is to be connected, to be spiritualized, to realize your presence with God, your connection. We truly believe that God is, we truly believe that the universe is a spiritual system that works according to God's intention, God's declaration, that it created us in its image and likeness, and that it works for us the same way if we will consciously cooperate with us. It works for us the same way even if we unconsciously cooperate with us. Even in our ignorance, it works according to our belief. If you believe something will work, it will. If you believe something won't work, it won't. It's done unto you according to your belief. If you believe that you can discover the presence of the divine within and make connection with it, you will. And if you believe you can't, you won't. So take some inventory of your thoughts and your beliefs. Take some time to sit and just be still for no other purpose than to experience the presence of God. And ask yourselves as you do this, hopefully in nature, hopefully by running water if you can, ask yourself if you're ready to turn away from everything in the world of appearances and put your faith and your trust only in God. And only in your belief that God will respond to you as you turn the valve and invite more of its presence and more of its activity to flow into the world through you and as you. And so it is.